trees.
Hey, how good is this, folks? Before we get into it, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, because after this story, you might want to reconsider camping in the woods again. We're talking about Marcus Chen, 58, who lives deep in Washington's Cascade Mountains, where the nearest gas station is 40 miles away, and locals still whisper about what they've seen moving through the trees. It could be a hoax, but what if it isn't? Marcus Chen wasn't always a mountain hermit. Nah, this dude used to be a trauma surgeon down in Seattle, saving lives at 3 in the morning, running on coffee and adrenaline. But after his wife Elena died from cancer, slow, painful, the kind that takes everything, he couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't handle the fluorescent lights, the beeping machines, the families looking at him like he was supposed to have all the answers. So he packed up, sold the house in the suburbs, and bought himself a cabin so far into the wilderness that even the mail carrier was like, "You sure about this, my guy?" That was 4 years ago. Now Marcus lived simple, real simple. His days started before sunrise. None of that snooze button nonsense, chopping wood until his back reminded him he wasn't 30 anymore, hauling water from the creek, keeping the generator running. The cabin was small, just one room really, with a wood stove that kept it warm enough to not freeze your ass off. Books lined one wall, medical journals mixed with philosophy and some trashy thrillers Elena used to love. He'd read them sometimes, running his fingers over pages she'd touched, feeling like she was still close. Dude was out here living like it's 1823, and honestly, respect. No Netflix, no DoorDash, no scrolling through social media. At 2, I'm hating yourself. Just him, the forest, and whatever thoughts came up. Most days he'd walk the property, checking his supply shed, making sure no bears had gotten curious. Sometimes he'd sit on the porch with his morning coffee, watching fog roll through the pine trees like the mountain was breathing. It was peaceful. Lonely as hell, but peaceful. Marcus had gotten used to the sounds of the wilderness. The way wind moved through different types of trees, the whisper of aspens versus the deep groan of old-growth pine. How elk sounded when they bugled during mating season, all desperate and weird. The scratch of raccoons on his roof at night, probably plotting a heist on his trash. But autumn brought different sounds, sounds that made the hair on his neck stand up. It started with footprints. Marcus found the first one on a muddy trail near the creek. And this thing was massive, like dinner plate-sized massive. He'd seen bear prints before hell. He'd scared off a black bear from his porch last spring, but this wasn't a bear. The shape was all wrong. Too human-like. 5 distinct toes, but spread wide, with what looked like the impression of a heel. Marcus stood there staring at it, his medical brain trying to categorize what he was seeing. Human? Impossible. Too large. Bear? Wrong structure. His heart did this weird flutter thing, and he told himself it was probably just some weird mud formation. Nature playing tricks. But then came the branches. Walking his property line a week later, Marcus noticed trees with branches broken clean off, and not low branches. Either these were like 12, 15 feet up, snapped like toothpicks. Storm damage, he thought. Had to be, except there hadn't been a storm. The weather had been clear, just that crisp autumn cold that makes everything smell like earth and dying leaves. He reached up, touching the splintered wood, and his surgeon hands that had steadied during countless emergencies, trembled just a bit. The hell is going on out here? He muttered to himself. Because when you live alone, talking to yourself stops being weird and starts being necessary. The feeling of being watched came next, and this is where Marcus started questioning his sanity for real. You know that vibe when someone's staring but you can't see him? Yeah, that. He'd be splitting wood and suddenly feel this presence, heavy and aware. He'd spin around quick, axe in hand, scanning the tree line. Nothing, just shadows and evergreens. But the feeling wouldn't leave. It sat on his shoulders like a weight, following him from the woodpile to the cabin, from the cabin to the creek. One evening, standing on his porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains orange and purple, Marcus saw movement. Not the normal movement of deer or the waddle of a porcupine. This was big, deliberate, and way too damn tall. It was there for maybe 3 seconds, a dark shape between two massive pines about 50 yards out, and then gone. Marcus blinked hard, wondering if his eyes were playing games. He'd been out here alone for 4 years. Maybe isolation was finally getting to him. Maybe he needed to drive into town, have an actual conversation with another human being, remember what normal felt like. But deep in his gut, that instinct that used to tell him when a patient was crashing before the monitors caught it, he knew something was out there. Something real. Something watching. November hit the Cascades like a sledgehammer. Temperature dropped fast, turning rain into sleet, then snow. Marcus had been through 4 winters up here and knew the drill. He'd spent October stocking up dried goods, canned vegetables, rice, beans, enough coffee to fuel a small army. His woodshed was packed, rows of split logs stacked neat and ready. Generator was serviced, propane tanks topped off. He even had backup batteries for his backup flashlights, because out here, when the power went, you were on your own. The first major storm rolled in on a Tuesday. Marcus watched it come from his porch, dark clouds moving over the peaks like something out of a fantasy movie. The temperature plummeted. Within hours, snow was falling thick and heavy, the kind that makes you forget the world was ever any other color. Wind picked up, howling through the valley like it was angry at everything. He retreated inside, fed the wood stove, and settled in with a book. This was fine. He'd done this before. Just another storm. Except this storm wasn't just another storm. By nightfall, the wind was hitting the cabin in waves that made the walls creak. Snow piled against the windows, blocking out what little light the moon would have given. Marcus added another log to the fire, listening to it crack and pop, watching shadows dance on the log walls. The power had been out since sunset, not that he had much power out here anyway, just the generator, and he was saving that fuel. The cabin stayed warm enough, the stove doing its job. Around 10, Marcus heated up some canned soup. Nothing fancy, just something hot in his belly. He ate standing by the stove, watching the flames through the small glass door, thinking about Elena. She would have loved this in a weird way, the isolation, the simplicity. She used to say the hospital was too loud, too bright, too full of death, pretending to be life. If I ever get out of this place, she'd said during her last week, morphine making her voice soft, I want to go somewhere quiet, somewhere real. Well, Elena, Marcus thought, this is about as real as it gets. That's when the sound came, a knock, heavy, deliberate, against the cabin door. Marcus froze, soup spoon halfway to his mouth. The wind, he thought, just the wind throwing a branch against the door. Except the knock came again, boom, 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 rhythmic, purposeful, not wind, not a branch. Someone or something was knocking. You've got to be kidding me, Marcus said aloud, his voice sounding small in the cabin. His heart rate picked up, that old ER feeling when everything suddenly got serious. He set the soup down, moving toward the door. His hand hovered over the handle. Every logical part of his brain screamed at him, do not open that door. Nothing good knocks on doors during blizzards in the middle of nowhere. This is how horror movies start, and you know how they end. But Marcus was a surgeon. He'd spent 30 years running toward emergencies, not away from them. And something in those knocks, they didn't sound aggressive. They sounded desperate, weak, almost. The kind of sound someone makes when they're out of options. He grabbed his lantern with one hand, took a breath, and pulled the door open. The cold hit him first, wind and snow slamming into the cabin like it had been waiting for the chance. Marcus raised the lantern, and what he saw made every medical diagnosis, every rational thought, every bit of his scientific training just stop. Standing in his doorway was a Bigfoot. A female, he registered automatically, his brain going clinical to avoid freaking the hell out. She was massive, had to be 7, maybe 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown fur matted with snow and ice. Her shoulders were hunched forward, body language screaming exhaustion. But that's not what made Marcus's breath catch. In her arms, clutched against her chest, was a baby, a tiny Bigfoot baby, maybe 3 feet tall, wrapped in what looked like moss and ferns, shivering violently. The baby's fur was lighter than its mother's, almost golden, but soaked through. Its eyes were closed, small chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. The medical part of Marcus's brain kicked in immediately, hypothermia, possibly pneumonia, definitely in distress. The mother Bigfoot looked at Marcus with eyes that were completely, devastatingly human, dark brown, exhausted, pleading. She didn't move forward, didn't try to force her way in. She just stood there in the storm, holding her child, and in that moment Marcus understood she was asking, begging, even, for shelter, for help, for something she couldn't provide on her own. Every cell in Marcus's body was screaming contradictory shit. Fear because holy hell, this is a cryptid, a creature that's not supposed to exist, standing at my door. Disbelief, because this can't be real, must be a hallucination. Maybe I hit my head chopping wood. But strongest of all was something else. Something that had guided him through 3 decades of medicine. The need to help. Jesus Christ, Marcus whispered. Then, louder, over the wind. Okay, come in, come inside. He stepped back, pulling the door wider. The Bigfoot mother hesitated for just a second. Probably smart, Marcus thought. Walking into a human's space was probably the last thing her instincts wanted, but then she ducked low and stepped through. She had to bend almost in half to fit through the doorway, her massive frame suddenly making the cabin feel tiny. Snow fell from her fur in clumps, melting immediately on the warm wooden floor. Marcus shut the door against the storm, and the sudden quiet was almost louder than the wind had been. He turned, lantern light throwing wild shadows, and got his first real look at them. The mother was trembling, whether from cold, fear, or exhaustion, probably all 3. The baby in her arms looked bad, real bad. Its breathing was wrong, too fast and too shallow, and even from a few feet away, Marcus could see it was fading. All right, Marcus said, his voice steady, slipping into doctor mode because that's what you do when everything's insane. We need to get them warm, now. He moved to the wood stove, grabbed the 2 thick wool blankets he kept draped over his reading chair, and spread them on the floor in front of the fire. The mother watched his every movement, her body coiled tight like she might bolt. Marcus made his movements slow, deliberate, non-threatening. He'd worked with frightened patients before, people in shock, people in pain, and the principle was the same. Show them you're trying to help. Here, he said, gesturing to the blankets. For you and the baby. Sit, please. The Bigfoot mother looked at the blankets, then at Marcus, then back at the blankets. Slowly, like she was moving through water, she lowered herself to the floor. The way she moved was careful, protective, keeping the baby cradled against her chest. She settled on the blankets, curling her massive body around her child, and for the first time since opening the door, Marcus saw her shoulders drop just a little. Relief, maybe, or just exhaustion winning. Marcus knelt a few feet away, keeping his distance but close enough to assess. The baby was in trouble. Its skin, visible in patches where the fur was thin, had a grayish tint, lips almost blue. Classic hypothermia presentation. How long have you been out there? He asked, knowing she couldn't answer but needing to voice something. How long has the baby been like this? The mother made a sound, low and guttural, not quite a growl, but not anything Marcus had heard before either. It sounded like grief, like fear, like a mother watching her child slip away and being powerless to stop it. Okay, Marcus said, standing. First thing, we need to warm the baby up, but carefully. Too fast, and we shock the system. He moved to his small kitchen area, filled a metal pot with water from his supply, and set it on the wood stove to heat. While it warmed, he grabbed his medical kit, old habit. He'd kept it stocked even up here, and pulled out a thermometer, though hell, if he knew if it would work, on a cryptid baby. The mother watched him move, her eyes tracking every action. Marcus kept narrating, keeping his voice calm. Just getting some supplies. Going to check the baby's temperature. Try to warm them up safely. That's all. Just trying to help. When the water was warm, not hot, just warm, Marcus soaked a clean towel in it and wrung it out. He approached slowly, showing the towel in his open palm. For the baby, he said softly, to warm them up. The mother's eyes locked on the towel, then on Marcus's face. She didn't move, didn't give permission, but didn't refuse either. Taking that as a green light, Marcus reached out slowly and laid the warm towel across the baby's small body, avoiding the face. The baby made a small sound, almost like a whimper, and the mother's grip tightened instantly. I know, Marcus said quietly. I know it's scary, but we need to do this. Over the next hour, Marcus worked with the focus that had carried him through countless emergency rooms. He kept applying warm towels, gently massaging the baby's limbs to improve circulation, a technique for hypothermia victims. The mother never interfered, but she also never stopped watching. Her eyes followed his hands, alert for any threat, ready to snatch her baby away if Marcus made one wrong move. The baby started responding. Its breathing slowed a bit, deepened. Color began returning to the visible skin. Small victories, but in medicine, small victories were everything. Marcus felt that old familiar rush, the one that came when a patient started turning around, when death stopped knocking quite so loud. There we go, Marcus murmured. Come on, little one, stay with us. Around midnight, Marcus heated some broth, just basic chicken broth from a can, and diluted it with water. He had no idea if a Bigfoot baby could digest it, but dehydration was a killer, and the baby needed fluids. He poured some into a small cup and offered it to the mother, showing her by mimicking drinking. She stared at the cup for a long moment. Then, with infinite care, she adjusted the baby in her arms and brought the cup to its mouth. The baby's lips moved weakly, tongue lapping at the liquid. Most of it dribbled down its chin, but some went in. The mother waited, patient, letting the baby drink at its own pace. She didn't take any for herself. Marcus watched this and felt something crack in his chest. This wasn't a monster. This wasn't some wild animal. This was a mother, exhausted and terrified, prioritizing her child's needs above her own. He'd seen human mothers do the same thing in the ER, refuse pain medication until their kids were treated, push away food until their children had eaten. Universal language of motherhood, apparently crossing species lines. You need to drink too, Marcus said gently, filling another cup. He set it on the floor within her reach and backed away, giving her space. The mother looked at the cup, then at her baby, then back at Marcus. She reached out with one massive hand, Jesus. Her hand could palm a basketball easy, and picked up the cup. She drank it in one go, water disappearing fast, and Marcus realized she must have been beyond dehydrated. How long had she been out there, searching for help? He refilled the cup twice more, and she drank both. The baby, meanwhile, had finally stopped shivering as violently. Its breathing was still rough, but steadier. Progress. Real progress. Marcus set up a rotation warm towels every 20 minutes, small amounts of liquid every hour, constant monitoring. The mother stayed exactly where she was, curled around her baby, but her body language shifted. The coiled spring tension eased a fraction. She wasn't relaxed, hell no, but she wasn't about to bolt either. Something like trust, fragile and tentative, was forming in that small cabin. Around 3 in the morning, exhaustion hit Marcus like a truck. He'd been running on adrenaline, but his body was reminding him he was 58, not 28, and he couldn't do all-nighters like he used to. He settled into his chair, wrapped in a blanket, keeping the fire fed but letting himself rest. Every 30 minutes he'd wake, check on his patients, because that's what they were now, add wood to the stove, make sure the baby was still breathing. The mother never slept, or if she did, Marcus never saw it. She stayed vigilant, watching over her child, occasionally glancing at Marcus like she was still deciding whether he was a threat or an ally. As dawn approached, grey light seeping through the snow-covered windows, Marcus looked at the scene in his cabin and had to laugh quietly. 4 years ago, if someone had told him he'd be playing doctor to a cryptid baby while a Bigfoot mother watched from his living room floor, he would have recommended they check into a psych ward, but here he was. Life was weird. The universe had a sense of humor darker than his coffee. The baby stirred, making small sounds that were almost like coos. The mother responded immediately, pulling it closer, making soft guttural sounds back. Communication, Marcus realized. They were talking to each other in whatever language Bigfoots used. The baby's eyes opened huge, dark, aware, and looked around the cabin with what Marcus swore was curiosity. "Hey there, little one," Marcus said softly. "Welcome back to the land of the living." The mother's eyes snapped to him, and for the first time, Marcus saw something besides fear and exhaustion in them. Gratitude, maybe, or at least acknowledgement that he'd helped. She made a sound, low and rumbling, that somehow felt like thank you. "Yeah," Marcus said, his throat tight. "Yeah, you're welcome." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin, something impossible had happened. A boundary had been crossed, a connection made, and Marcus Chen, former trauma surgeon turned mountain hermit, sat in his chair watching a Bigfoot mother care for her baby and thought about Elena, about compassion, about the weird and beautiful ways the universe reminds you that you're not alone. The storm didn't let up. If anything, it got worse, which Marcus didn't think was possible, but the Cascades were apparently like hold my beer. By the second day, snow had buried his porch steps completely. The windows showed nothing but white, like the cabin was floating in some void. Wind screamed through the valley, making the whole structure creak and groan. Marcus was officially cut off from the world. Not that he'd had much connection anyway, but now it was absolute. No leaving, no outside help, just him and his unexpected guests. The baby, though. Baby was doing better. Way better. Marcus had spent the first night, worried the little thing might not make it. But by morning of day 2, color had returned to its skin, breathing was almost normal, and it was making noises that sounded less like distress and more like complaints, which, honestly, was a great sign. Complaining meant alive. The mother still wouldn't eat much. Marcus had offered everything he had: canned vegetables, dried fruit, even some jerky he'd made last fall, but she'd barely touch anything. She'd take small bits, enough to keep going, but that was it. The baby, though? Different story. The mother would mash up whatever Marcus offered, pre-chewing it sometimes, and feed it to the baby with a gentleness that made Marcus's chest ache. Every single time, baby ate first. Mother ate last, if at all. "You've got to eat more than that," Marcus said on the afternoon of day 2, watching her push away a bowl of oatmeal after 2 bites. "Can't take care of the kid if you collapse, you know." She looked at him with those impossibly human eyes and made a sound that somehow conveyed "I know, but my child needs it more." No words necessary. The message was clear. Marcus understood it on a level that went deeper than language. He'd seen parents in the ER do the same thing: refuse treatment, refuse food, refuse everything until their kids were stable. Biology and love, all mixed together into something primal. Didn't matter if you were human or an 8-foot cryptid, a parent was a parent. The baby got curious around midday. It had been mostly sleeping or eating, but now it was awake and alert, those huge dark eyes taking in the cabin. It made small sounds, almost like questions, and the mother would respond with soft grunts and rumbles. Marcus watched this exchange, fascinated despite everything. They were communicating, not just instinct, actual communication. The baby would point with a tiny hand towards something, the fire or the window, and the mother would respond. At one point, the baby pointed at Marcus, and the mother's body went tense immediately. But the baby kept pointing, kept making sounds, and the mother's tension slowly eased. She made a longer sound, something that felt like explanation. The baby tilted its head, studying Marcus with an intensity that was low-key unnerving. Then it made a small sound that Marcus could have sworn was laughter. "Oh, you think I'm funny?" Marcus said, unable to help smiling. "Just wait, kid. I haven't even shown you my dance moves yet." The mother made a sound that might have been amusement or indigestion. Hard to tell. By day 3, the dynamic had shifted. The mother was still cautious, still hyper-aware of everything Marcus did, but she'd relaxed enough to actually rest. Marcus would catch her with her eyes closed, head drooping, though she'd snap awake at any sound. The baby, meanwhile, was full-on recovered. It would crawl around the blankets, play with scraps of fabric, and make grabby hands at everything in reach. Normal baby behavior, just in a cryptid package. Marcus found himself falling into a routine. Wake up, feed the fire, heat water, prepare food. The mother would watch him, but no longer like he was a threat, more like she was learning. She'd observe how he used the wood stove, how he organized supplies, how he moved through the space. Smart, Marcus thought. Real smart. Learning human behavior to survive. The baby loved the fire. It would sit as close as the mother allowed, watching flames dance, reaching out with tiny hands before the mother gently pulled them back. Safety lesson, Marcus figured. Teaching boundaries. He'd bring over small branches, let the baby examine them before tossing them in the fire, showing cause and effect. The baby would watch the branch catch fire, eyes going wide, and make excited sound. "Yeah, fire's cool," Marcus said. "Also dangerous. Your mom's right to keep you back." The mother watched these interactions with what Marcus was starting to recognize as approval. She'd see him teaching the baby something fire safety, how to drink from a cup, whatever, and she'd make a sound that felt like encouragement, like she appreciated someone else helping raise her kid for a minute. On the 4th night, something changed. Marcus woke from a light sleep in his chair. That sixth sense developed from years of night shifts, telling him something was different. The fire had burned low, just embers glowing. In the dim light, he could make out the mother's shape, still curled around the baby, but her shoulders were shaking. At first, Marcus thought she was cold, but the cabin was warm. Then he realized she was crying. No sound, no noise, just silent sobs that moved through her massive frame. Her face was buried against the baby's fur, her whole body trembling with emotion. Marcus sat frozen, watching this moment of raw vulnerability. Here was this creature, this being who'd been holding it together for days, staying strong for her child, finally letting the weight of it all break her down. The fear she must have felt, wandering the storm with a dying baby, desperate enough to approach a human. The relief now, knowing her child would survive, the exhaustion of it all. Part of Marcus wanted to do something, say something, offer comfort, but he knew better. This was her moment. This was private grief and relief all mixed together, and the best thing he could do was let her have it without making it about him. So he sat there in the darkness, keeping his own vigil, while a Bigfoot mother cried silent tears over the baby she'd almost lost. And Marcus Chen, who'd walked away from medicine because he couldn't handle any more death, realized he'd just participated in saving a life again. Different circumstances, different species, but the core of it was the same. Seeing someone in need and choosing to help. Morning came eventually, like it always does. The mother's eyes were red, exhausted, but something in her posture had changed. She held herself differently, still protective, still aware, but not quite as desperate. The worst had passed. They'd made it through. The baby woke up hungry and cranky, making demanding sounds that had Marcus laughing. "Yeah, I hear you." Breakfast coming right up. He prepared oatmeal with honey and mashed berries, something easy to digest but nutritious. The mother took it, fed the baby first like always, but this time she actually ate her portion too. Not just picked at it, really ate it. Progress. As Marcus watched them eat, storm still raging outside, he thought about how wild life could be. 4 years of isolation, and this is what breaks the monotony. Not another human, not even a normal animal, but a cryptid mother and baby who needed help. The universe really did have the strangest timing. You know, Marcus said, more to himself than to them. Elena would have loved this. She always said I needed more chaos in my life. Guess she got her wish. The mother looked at him, tilting her head slightly, and Marcus could have sworn she understood. Maybe not the words, but the tone, the feeling behind them. Grief and humor all mixed together, because that's how you survive. You laugh at the absurdity while honoring the pain. The fifth day brought a shift in the weather. The wind died down, the snow slowed, and through the windows Marcus could finally see more than just white. The storm was breaking, which meant he knew his guests would be leaving soon. The realization hit harder than he expected. He'd gotten used to their presence, to not being alone, to having a purpose beyond just surviving another day. The mother felt it too. Marcus could tell by the way she kept looking toward the door, body language shifting from settled to restless. She'd glance at the window, then at her baby, then at Marcus. Calculating, planning. The baby was strong enough to travel now. The storm was clearing. Time to go home, wherever home was. Marcus spent the day preparing supplies he thought they might need. He gathered dried meat, wrapped in cloth, filled a watertight container with berries he'd preserved, found a thick wool blanket, one of his best, and folded it into a bundle they could carry. He didn't know if they'd take any of it, but he wanted to offer. As afternoon faded into evening, the mother stood. First time in days she'd fully risen to her height, and Jesus, she was massive. Her head nearly touched the ceiling, shoulders broad enough to block out the firelight. She stretched, joints popping audibly, and the baby made excited sounds, standing on wobbly legs beside her. Marcus stood too, facing them. This was it, the goodbye. He felt emotion rising in his throat and pushed it down. Keep it together, man. Don't make this weird. You're heading out, he said simply. Statement, not question. The mother looked at him, really looked at him, with an intensity that made Marcus feel seen all the way through. Then she did something that stopped his heart. She picked up the baby, held it carefully, and stepped closer to Marcus. Close enough that he could smell earth and pine and something wild. She lowered the baby slightly, presenting it, and the baby reached out a tiny hand toward Marcus. Marcus stood perfectly still, barely breathing. The baby's hand touched his, so small against his palm, and wrapped tiny fingers around his thumb. The grip was strong, determined. The baby looked up at him and made a sound that somehow felt like, "Thank you, like I'll remember you, like you saved my life." Tears hit Marcus's eyes before he could stop them. "Yeah," he managed to say, voice rough. "Yeah, you be good, okay? Listen to your mom. Stay safe out there." The mother pulled the baby back, cradling it against her chest, and Marcus saw moisture in her eyes too. Maybe Bigfoots cried the same as humans. Maybe grief and gratitude looked the same across all species. She made a sound, deep and resonant, that vibrated in Marcus's chest. Then she turned toward the door. Marcus moved quickly, grabbing the supply bundle he'd prepared. He held it out to her. "For the road," he said. "It's not much, but..." She took it carefully, examining the contents, and her eyes met his again. Understanding passed between them, clear as any words. She adjusted the bundle, securing it somehow against her body while still holding the baby, and moved to the door. Marcus opened it for her. Cold air rushed in, but the storm had definitely passed. Outside, the world was white and still, stars just starting to appear in the clearing sky. Beautiful and deadly, like nature always was. The mother stepped into the doorway, then paused. She turned back one more time, looked at Marcus with those eyes that would haunt him forever, and bowed her head slightly. "Respect. Gratitude. Goodbye. Safe travels," Marcus whispered. And then she was gone, moving into the snow with the baby held close, her massive form disappearing into the trees faster than seemed possible for something that size. Marcus stood in the doorway, cold seeping into his bones, watching until he couldn't see them anymore. Even then he stood there, feeling the weight of what had just happened, settle into his soul. Eventually, he closed the door. The cabin felt empty, more empty than it had in 4 years of solitude. The blankets by the fire were still rumpled, small patches of melted snow on the floor, a faint smell of something wild lingering in the air. Evidence that it had really happened, that he hadn't imagined it all. Marcus sat in his chair, staring at the fire, and let himself feel everything. The fear from that first night. The purpose that had returned when he'd had patience to care for. The connection formed across impossible boundaries. The loss now that they were gone. "Well, Elena," he said to the empty room, "I think I finally understand why you wanted somewhere real. Because this, all of this, was the most real thing I've felt since you died." He sat there until the fire burned low, thinking about mothers and children, about choosing compassion over fear, about how healing others could somehow heal yourself. Tomorrow he'd clean the cabin, restart his routine, go back to his solitary existence. But tonight, he'd let himself sit with the strange, beautiful impossibility of what had just happened. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Marcus woke stiff from sleeping in his chair, neck complaining loud about his life choices. He fed the fire, made coffee, and tried to process the last 5 days. In the bright morning light, part of him wanted to dismiss it all as some kind of isolation-induced hallucination. But the physical evidence was right there, the disturbed blankets, the used dishes, scratches on the floor from when the mother had shifted position. It happened. It was real. Marcus spent the day doing normal tasks, chopping wood, organizing supplies, clearing snow from his porch. But every few minutes, he'd find himself stopping, staring into the tree line, wondering, where had they gone? Was the baby still healthy? Had they made it home safe? Questions he'd never have answers to, and that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. 3 days after they left, Marcus was hauling water from the creek when he noticed something. Footprints in the snow, leading from the forest edge toward his property. Big footprints. His heart rate kicked up as he followed them with his eyes. They circled his cabin at a distance, staying in the trees, but clearly observing multiple sets of prints, different sizes. They were watching him. The realization should have scared him, being under surveillance by creatures strong enough to rip him apart, but instead, Marcus felt weirdly honored. They were checking on him, maybe making sure he wasn't a threat, or maybe just curious about the human who'd helped one of their own. He continued his water run, making no sudden moves, pretending he hadn't noticed. But when he got back to the cabin, he left extra dried meat and berries on a stump at the edge of the clearing. By morning, the food was gone. The pattern repeated over the next week. Marcus would leave offerings. They'd disappear. Sometimes he'd see movement in the trees, catch glimpses of large shapes moving through shadows. They never approached the cabin again, but they were there, present, aware. A month passed. The intense cold settled in for real, the kind of winter that made you question why humans ever decided to live anywhere north of Mexico. Marcus fell back into his routine, but it felt different now. He wasn't just existing anymore. He had purpose again, even if that purpose was just leaving food for his mysterious forest neighbors and wondering about a baby Bigfoot he'd helped save. Then one morning, Marcus woke to sounds outside. Multiple sounds. Movement. Lots of it. His hand went to the rifle he kept by the door. Old habit from living alone, but something made him pause. The sounds weren't aggressive. They were almost ceremonial. He pulled on his coat and boots, heart pounding, and opened the door. What he saw made him freeze completely. Bigfoots, dozens of them, 30, maybe 40, standing in a loose semicircle around his cabin. Males, females, young ones, all sizes, all ages. They stood in the snow, breath steaming in the cold air, completely silent, watching him. "Holy shit," Marcus breathed. In the center of the group stood the mother. Marcus recognized her immediately, same build, same fur pattern, and beside her, clinging to her leg, was the baby. Bigger now, healthier, fur thick and glossy. When the baby saw Marcus, It made an excited sound and tried to pull free, but the mother held it gently in place. An older Bigfoot stepped forward, massive, with silver streaks in its dark fur. A male, Marcus thought, though he was just guessing at this point. The elder moved with deliberate slowness, showing no aggression. It stopped about 10 feet from Marcus's porch and looked at him with eyes that held what Marcus could only describe as ancient wisdom. The elder made a sound, low and resonant. The other Bigfoots responded in kind, a chorus of voices that echoed through the valley. It wasn't threatening, it was acknowledgement. Recognition. The elder reached into what looked like a woven pouch at its side and pulled out something, holding it forward. Marcus descended the porch steps slowly, showing his empty hands. The elder waited, patient. When Marcus got close enough, the elder placed the object in his hands and stepped back. It was a carved piece of wood, not carved with tools. This was done with incredible precision using just hands and maybe teeth. It depicted a human figure and a Bigfoot standing side by side, and between them, a small baby Bigfoot. The craftsmanship was stunning, every detail perfect. A gift, a thank you. Marcus looked up at the elder, emotion choking his voice. I thank you. Thank you. The elder bowed its head slightly. Then the mother stepped forward, the baby beside her. She made a sound, gentle and warm, and the baby waddled toward Marcus on unsteady legs. Marcus knelt down, making himself smaller, less threatening. The baby reached him and threw tiny arms around his neck in what could only be called a hug. Marcus hugged back carefully, feeling soft fur and solid warmth and the rapid heartbeat of a healthy young creature. Hey there, little one, he whispered. You got so big. The baby pulled back, looked at Marcus with those huge dark eyes, and made a sound that Marcus absolutely knew meant thank you. Then it reached up and touched Marcus's face with one small hand, gentle and curious. Marcus felt tears tracking down his cheeks and didn't even try to stop them. The mother called softly, and the baby returned to her side. She looked at Marcus one more time, and the weight of gratitude in that look was almost physical. Then she turned, and the entire group began moving back toward the forest. They moved as one, coordinated and silent, disappearing into the trees like ghosts. Marcus stood in the snow, carved gift clutched in his hands, watching them go. Just before the last one vanished, it turned a young male, maybe adolescent, and raised one hand in what could only be called a wave. Marcus lifted his hand and waved back, laughing through his tears. Then they were gone. The forest was silent again, just whined through pine trees and the distant call of a raven. Marcus stood there for a long time, holding the carving, feeling like he'd just witnessed something sacred, something that maybe a dozen humans in all of history had ever experienced. He went back inside eventually, because standing in sub-zero temperatures would kill you quick. But he placed the carving in a position of honor on his mantle, where he'd see it every day. Physical proof that it had all happened, that for a brief moment in time, the line between species had blurred and compassion had won. Over the following months, Marcus noticed changes. The Bigfoots would leave him gifts, sometimes interesting stones, perfectly preserved pine cones. Once a deer hide tanned so beautifully, it must have taken incredible skill. He'd leave his own gifts, in return, preserved foods, tools he'd made, books, even though he doubted they could read them. A trade relationship, maybe, or just mutual acknowledgement. He'd see them sometimes, moving through the forest. They weren't hiding from him anymore. They'd show themselves at a distance, going about whatever Bigfoots did, living their lives. The baby, his baby, as Marcus had started thinking of it, would occasionally come close to the cabin, always with adults nearby. It would wave at Marcus if it saw him, and Marcus would wave back, feeling ridiculously happy every time. Spring came, then summer. Marcus's cabin became a weird neutral zone between human and Bigfoot territories. Neither side violated it, but both acknowledged it. Marcus found himself less lonely, even though his human contact was still basically zero. He had neighbors now. Strange neighbors, Impossible neighbors, but neighbors nonetheless. One evening, sitting on his porch watching sunset paint the mountains, Marcus thought about the journey that had led him here. From Seattle's trauma rooms to this remote cabin. From losing Elena to finding purpose again. From isolation to connection with beings most people didn't even believe existed. So what's the lesson here, right? Marcus said aloud, knowing there might be ears listening from the forest. What's the takeaway? He thought about it, watching clouds turn orange and purple. The lesson was simple, even if the circumstances were wild. When fear and compassion go head to head, choose compassion. Every time. Because on the other side of that choice might be something beautiful, something that changes you, something that reminds you what it means to be alive. Marcus had opened his door to the impossible, and the impossible had given him back something he thought he'd lost. Forever. Connection, purpose, and the understanding that loneliness was a choice. You could build walls, or you could build bridges. He'd built a bridge, and on the other side was a whole community he never knew existed. This whole thing's fiction, Marcus said to the darkening sky, to Elena's memory, to whatever Bigfoots might be listening. But the core of it, the idea that we're all just trying to survive, trying to protect what we love, trying to find compassion in a harsh world that's real as hell. The forest whispered back through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, Marcus heard a sound that might have been a Bigfoot calling to others. He smiled, took a sip of his cooling coffee, and settled in to watch the stars come out. Because life was weird and beautiful, and sometimes, if you were really lucky, it threw you a curveball so impossible that all you could do was step up to the plate and swing. Marcus had swung, and he'd connected. The game had changed. He'd changed. And that, more than any medicine he'd ever practiced, felt like healing. Would you open that door? Would you choose helping over hiding when the impossible showed up desperate and freezing? That's the question, fam. That's what Marcus had to decide in a split second on a stormy night. And his answer, his choice, created something beautiful. Drop your thoughts below. Think about what you'd do, who you'd be, when fear and compassion collide. Because that moment comes for all of us eventually. Maybe not with a Bigfoot at the door, but with something that challenges us to be better than our instincts, braver than our fears. Peace.